What happens when a country finally gets what it has been demanding for months? What happens when the protests work, the government responds, the borders tighten, and tens of thousands of foreign nationals begin leaving? You would expect the pressure to reduce. You would expect jobs to suddenly become easier to find. You would expect hospitals to become less crowded. You would expect crime to fall. You would expect struggling communities to finally breathe again. But here is the uncomfortable question South Africa now has to answer. What if foreigners leave and the problems remain? Because that is where this story has become much bigger than immigration. And people, just a few weeks ago, the big number being discussed was 53,449 foreign nationals processed for deportation or repatriation.
We have seen a tremendous increase on the number of foreign nationals that have either been deported or repatriated today. As of close of business of the 11th July 2026, a total of 53,449 foreign nationals have been processed for either deportation and repatriation or repatriation.
That number is already old. By late July 2026, the South African government said more than 68,000 undocumented foreign nationals have been repatriated in a little over a month. And by August, reports based on figures from governments in the region suggested that more than 178,000 immigrants had either returned home or been removed from South Africa during this wider wave. Now, we have to be careful here. Those numbers do not all mean the same thing. Not everybody was formally deported by South African government. Many people returned voluntarily, some repatriated with the help from their own governments. Others were formally deported after immigration processes. But whichever number you choose, one thing is clear. Something major has happened. Thousands upon thousands of African migrants have left South Africa. Malawians, Zimbabweans, Mozambicans, Nigerians, Ghanaians, and others. So if the demand was foreigners must go, then many people can now say they are going. But this is where Afri wants us to look beyond the celebration. Because only days ago, South Africa released another number, and this number tells a very different story. The official unemployment rate rose to 33.6% in the second quarter of 2026. Think about that. At the same time, South Africa is carrying out one of its toughest migration enforcement drives in years. Roughly 1 in 3 people in the labor force is still officially unemployed. So we need to ask a simple question. If migrants were the main reason South Africa could not find jobs, when exactly should the jobs begin appearing? That is a conversation we are having today. Not whether South Africa has the right to control its borders. It does. Not whether the people who are in the country illegally can be removed under the law. They can. Every serious country needs a functioning immigration system. But there's a huge difference between controlling immigration and believing immigration is the main reason a country is struggling. And if South Africa gets these two things confused, it may win the immigration battle while losing the fight that really matter. The fight for jobs, the fight against poverty, the fight against crime, the fight against corruption, and the fight to build an economy large enough for its own people. Welcome to Afri. On this channel, we look beyond the headline and ask the questions Africa cannot afford to ignore. If you're new here, subscribe to this channel, turn on your notifications, and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. And I want you to stay with me until the very end, because there is one question we must answer. If every undocumented migrant disappears from South Africa tomorrow morning, will South Africa's biggest problems disappear with them? Let us look at the facts. First, we need to understand something. South Africa did not suddenly start deporting people in June or July 2026. The government had already been increasing immigration enforcement. In April 2026, the Department of Home Affairs announced that it has carried out 109,344 deportations over the previous 2 financial years. According to the department, annual deportations rose from 39,672 in the 2023/2024 financial year to 51,560 in 2024/2025, and then to 57,784 in 2025/2026. The government called this a major increase in enforcement. It also introduced technology, biometric checks, drones, body cameras, better border systems, and a program called Operation New Broom, which was launched in 2025 to find, arrest, and deport people staying in the country illegally. Then the pressure became even stronger. Anti-migrant protests grew. Groups demanded tougher action. Operation Dudula became one of the most visible names in this debate. There were demonstrations. There were demands for foreigners to leave. There were accusations that undocumented migrants were taking jobs, using public services, and contributing to crime. And eventually, the government introduced a wider 5-point migration plan. Authorities increased law enforcement operations. Immigration cases moved through the courts. A temporary repatriation processing center was established in Musina, close to the Zimbabwe border. By late July, the government said tens of thousands had already been processed and repatriated. South Africa also began rolling out more digital systems to monitor movement across its borders. So nobody can honestly say the government is doing nothing. It is doing a lot. And South Africa, who spent years demanding stronger border control, can fairly say that their pressure helped put immigration in the center of national politics. But then, something has happened. The line between asking the government to enforce the law and other people trying to enforce the law themselves started becoming dangerously thin. This is where the issue becomes serious. South Africa's government has repeatedly said migration management belongs to the state, not to a political movement, not to a crowd, not to somebody standing outside a clinic, not to anyone demanding your identity document. The government said people cannot block others from hospitals, clinics, schools, or other public services. It warned against intimidation and violence. It said unlawful searches and identity checks are not acceptable. Why is that important? Because a country can have strict immigration laws and still have the rule of law. Those two things are not enemies. You can say our borders must be protected and still say nobody should be attacked because of where they come from. You can say undocumented migrants should follow the law and also say citizens must follow the law too. That is no weakness. That is how a functioning country is supposed to work. Imagine this. You are walking home. A group stops you. They look at your face. They hear your accent and they decide you do not belong. They demand your papers. Who gives them that power? Now imagine you are actually South African, but someone thinks you look foreign. What happens then? This is why mob enforcement is dangerous. Today, the targets may be undocumented migrants. Tomorrow, it could be illegal migrants. The next day, it could be a South African from another province. Then it could be somebody from a different ethnic group. Once ordinary people are allowed to decide who belongs and who does not, the law starts losing its meaning. And this is not only an African lesson, it is a human lesson. When the state fails to do its job, citizens have every right to protest. They can vote, they can march, they can organize, they can demand change. But the answer cannot be to become the police, the immigration officer, the judge, and the court at all words. And this brings us to the question behind all of this. Why did the anger become so powerful in the first place? To understand South Africans who are angry about immigration, you have to understand the country they are living in. South Africa is one of the most developed economies on the continent. It has world-class businesses, beautiful cities, huge mineral wealth, strong financial institutions, major universities, factories, ports, tourism, agriculture, technology. Yet, millions of ordinary people still feel locked out of that wealth. Official unemployment is now 33.6%. For young people, the situation is even more painful. Many people finish school and cannot find work. Many families depend on social grants. Some communities struggle with housing. Some clinics are under pressure. Crime is a daily fear. Inequality remains extremely high. And in some places, basic services do not work the way people expect them to. So when someone says the pie is too small, you can understand the feeling. If 10 people are fighting over 3 pieces of bread, every extra hand reaching towards the table can feel like a threat. That feeling is real. But here is the mistake. Instead of asking why there are only 3 pieces of bread, people begin fighting who deserves to eat them. That is how migrants became an easy target. A foreign shop owner is visible, a Zimbabwe worker is visible, a Nigerian trader is visible, a Malawi laborer is visible, but corruption is harder to see. Weak economic growth is harder to see. A broken education system is harder to see. Bad local government is harder to see. Poor transport is harder to see. Years of weak investments are harder to see. Problems in electricity, rail, ports, and water are harder to put a face on. And that is why blaming migrants can become politically powerful. It gives a complicated problem a simple face. But simple answers do not always solve complicated problems. Let us return to unemployment. South Africa's official unemployment rate increased from 32.7% in the first quarter of 2026 to 33.6% in the second quarter. That happened while immigration enforcement was getting tougher. Now, it will be unfair to say deportations should immediately cause unemployment to fail. Economies do not work that quickly, but it will also be wrong to tell people that removing foreigners will somehow fix unemployment without looking at the deeper cause. The International Monetary Fund has spent years pointing to those deeper problems: slow growth, weaker infrastructure, problems in freight, rail, and ports, water challenges, governance problems, corruption, business rules that make it difficult for companies to grow, a labor market that struggles to bring young people into work, deep inequality left behind by apartheid, long distances between where poor people live and where jobs are located. Think about the last one. So South Africans spend a huge amount of time and money simply traveling to places where work exists. That is not caused by Malawian migrants. A business that cannot grow because transport and logistics are failing is not going to suddenly hire thousands of workers because a Zimbabwean went home. A young person who leaves school without the skills employers need does not suddenly gain those skills because a Nigerian was deported. A municipality that cannot provide reliable water does not suddenly become efficient because foreigners leave. A corrupt officials does not suddenly become honest because immigration numbers fall. This is the part of the conversation that can easily disappear when everybody is shouting about foreigners. South Africa has migration problems, but South Africa also has an economic structure problem, and the second problem is much bigger. This is where we have to be careful with slogans. There are definitely cases where employers hire undocumented migrants because they pay them less. That is a real problem, and it hurts South African workers. If a company refuses to hire a local worker for a fair wage and instead hires someone without legal status because that person is easier to exploit, the government should act. But who is actually breaking the labor law here? The migrants, the employer, or both? If the employer is never punished, what stops that employer from finding another desperate worker tomorrow? This is why the government's focus on workplace inspection matters. The law has to follow the money too. You cannot arrest the poor worker at the bottom while the business owner who builds a system around cheap illegal labor continues as normal. And research has also challenged the idea that migrants simply remove jobs from South Africans one for one. An OECD and International Labour Organization study on South Africa found that immigrants can contribute positively to the economy and that immigration was not associated with lower employment rates of South Africans overall. Migrants are also active in small businesses and informal trade. That does not mean immigration has no pressure on particular communities or industries. Of course, it can, but the economy is more complicated than saying one foreigner working equals one South Africa unemployed. If only it were that simple. If it were, South Africa could deport enough people and watch unemployment collapse. But nobody serious can promise that. Then we must come to one of the most emotional arguments: crime. South Africans are right to be angry about crime. Nobody should have to live in fear. Nobody should excuse a criminal because the criminal is foreign. If a foreign national commits murder, robbery, drug trafficking, or any other crime, that person should face the law. But there's a difference between saying some migrants commit crimes and saying migrants are the reason South Africa has a crime problem. Research has repeatedly warned against making that jump. A 2024 academic study described the belief that migrants are responsible for most crime as a stereotype not supported by evidence. Earlier research looking at migration and different crime categories also did not find any evidence that a higher share of foreign immigrants was driving most types of crimes. Again, this does not mean foreign nationals never commit crimes. Of course they do. South Africans commit crimes too. Nigerians commit crimes. Ghanaians commit crimes. Americans commit crimes. British people commit crimes. Criminality is not a password. The proper response is to arrest criminals and not turn nationality into evidence of guilt. Because when an entire group is blamed for crime, innocent people pay for crimes they never committed, and actual criminals can still escape. There's another side of this story that numbers cannot fully show. Imagine building a life in a country for years and then suddenly deciding that it is safer to live.
I sell cars. Of course, I had 2 vehicles, and I had a house I went into mortgage for about 2 years now. So I had to sell. One was vandalized, and the other one I had to sell cheaply just to get my family to my in-laws and get my children back to the in-laws and my wife to a new apartment somewhere else, which I didn't disclose. Even the movers, like the U-Haul movers, was someone from a different suburb I had to bring so that people from my suburb don't know where my wife went to.
Imagine your children are in school. You have a small business. You know your neighbors. You have friends. Then one morning, the atmosphere changes. People begin asking you where you come from. Rumors spread. Protests begin. Your family calls you from home. They say, please come back. That is the reality some migrants have faced. Reports from this latest wave say some children have had their education interrupted. Health organizations have also raised concerns about people returning home while depending on continuing medical treatment. These are also human beings, and recognizing their humanity does not mean South Africa must abandon immigration law. This is where African conversations often become too extreme. One side says, open the borders and let everybody stay. The other says, remove everybody. But there is a middle ground called law. Document people properly. Know who enters. Know who leaves. Speed up asylum decisions. Punish people who break immigration laws through legal processes. Punish employers who exploit undocumented workers. Secure the border and protect people from mob violence. A serious country should be able to do all those things at the same time. But now, we have come to a cost South Africa may not have expected: its relationship with the rest of Africa. South Africa is not an island. Its companies operate across the continent. Its banks do businesses across Africa. Its telecom companies serve millions of Africans. Its entertainers perform across the continent. Its products are sold across African markets. Its diplomats speak about African unity. South Africa is a major player in the African Union, and its history gives it a special place in Africa's political story. During apartheid, African countries paid a price for supporting South Africa's liberation struggle. Frontline states gave support to the anti-apartheid movement. Some faced attacks and economic pressure. That history created goodwill, but goodwill is not permanent. In 2026, Ghana pushed for the issue of attacks and hostility towards African nationals in South Africa to be discussed at the African Union level. Nigeria and Ghana later agreed to work together against what they describe as Afrophobic protests and push for stronger African Union action. There have also been calls in parts of West Africa to boycott South African companies. South Africa has pushed back strongly. Its government says it is unfair to describe the whole country as xenophobic or anti-African. And on that point, the government is right. More than 60 million people cannot all be painted with one brush. Millions of South Africans do not support violence against foreigners. Many have spoken against it. Many work with migrants. Many have foreign friends, spouses, colleagues, and neighbors. So this story should never become South Africans hate Africans. That is lazy and dangerous. But national reputation does not only depend on what most people believe, it can also be damaged by what the world repeatedly says. And videos of people being chased, lost from service, or forced from communities travel much faster than government statements. That is a problem. Now, think about the business side. South African companies have spent decades expanding across Africa. MTN is one obvious example. South African-linked businesses have operated in banking, retail, entertainment, mining, insurance, and telecommunications across the continent. That success depends partly on African consumers. So what happens when anger towards South Africans begins affecting those consumers? In June, MTN's group chief executive warned against boycott calls after protests reached the company's offices in Ghana. His argument was simple. These companies are deeply connected to the economies where they operate. They employ local people, they pay local taxes, they have local shareholders and customers. So boycotting them could also hurt Africans in those countries. That is true. But the fact that the conversation is happening at all should concern South Africa, because reputations have economic value. If consumers begin seeing South African brand as a symbol of political problem, that can become expensive. If artists lose bookings, that becomes income lost. If tourists change their minds, that becomes income lost. If African professionals begin choosing other destinations, that becomes talent lost. If diplomatic relationships become colder, business can eventually feel it too. This does not mean South Africa's economy is about to collapse because of anti-migrant protests. That would be an exaggeration. But it does mean that there's a price attached to how a country treats people, and sometimes that price arrives slowly. This is also why Nelson Mandela's name keeps appearing in these debates. Mandela's South Africa was sold to the world as something extraordinary. A country that had every reason to choose revenge but tried reconciliation. A country coming out of a racist system but trying to build a society around equal rights. The Rainbow Nation, Ubuntu, human dignity, rule of law. Those ideas give South Africa something money cannot buy: moral authority. But moral authority can be lost. It cannot simply be inherited forever from Mandela. Every generation has to earn it, and this is where South Africa faces a difficult question. Can a country present itself as one of the leaders of African unity while African migrants are afraid of being targeted inside the same country? There is no easy answer, because again, South Africa has the right to remove people who have no legal rights to remain. But how does that matter? A deportation carried out by the state after legal processing is one thing. A family being dragged from a home by a crowd is another. A workplace inspection by officials is one thing. A citizen stopping somebody because of their accent is another thing. A secure border is one thing. Hatred is another. Africa must learn to separate these things. To be fair, the South African government is now working through a political minefield. If it does not enforce immigration laws, Anglo citizens say it has abandoned them. If it enforces those laws aggressively, critics say it is encouraging xenophobia. If it condemns vigilante groups, some citizens accuse it of protecting foreigners. If it does nothing when vigilante group acts, it risks weakening the rule of law. There is no simple way out, but there is one correct principle. The state must control the border, and the state must control the enforcement. That's why the government's own money is important. Migration management is the responsibility of the state, not private groups. That line has to remain clear, because if government lose control of enforcement, the immigration crisis can turn into something much worse, a crisis of law itself. Now, let's return to the word victory. The South Africans who demanded stronger immigration enforcement win. In what sense? Yes, the government listened, enforcement increased, water systems are changing, workplace inspections have increased, large numbers of undocumented people have left. Migration is now one of the biggest national issues. That is political influence, and there is actually a lesson in that for the rest of Africa. Citizens are not powerless. When people organize peacefully, remain focused, and keep demanding action, government can move. But there is a second lesson. Getting what you demanded does not automatically mean the country is better. Because now comes the test. Will unemployment fall? Will crime fall? Will housing improve? Will hospitals work better? Will young South Africans find jobs? Will schools improve? Will corruption fall? Will electricity, water, rail and ports improve? Will inequality begin to reduce? These are the numbers that will tell us whether this was a real victory. And if these numbers do not improve, South Africa will face another uncomfortable question. Who gets blamed next? That is why this moment is so important. If a country convinces itself that one group is the main cause of its problem, removing that group creates an expectation. People expect life to improve, but if life does not actually improve, the anger does not disappear. It looks for another target. Remember that statement from the protest? The pie is too small to share. Maybe that is the most important sentence in this whole story. Because yes, for millions of South Africans, the pie feels too small. But why? South Africa is rich in minerals. It has advanced companies. It has skilled people. It has financial markets. It has farm. It has tourism. It has one of Africa's strongest industrial bases. So why are so many people fighting for such small slice? That is a real question. The INF says South Africa's long-term problems include weak growth, infrastructure failure, governance problems, corruption, deep inequality and barriers that make it harder for businesses to grow and create jobs. Those problems existed before this latest migration wave. They will exist after it unless South Africa fixes them. And this is where political courage is needed. Because telling people foreigners are the problem is easy. Telling people we need years of reform, better schools, better local government, investment, stronger infrastructure and cleaner leadership is much harder. One feet on the protest sign, the other requires actual government. South Africans does not have to choose between secure borders and African brotherhood. It can have both. It can deport undocumented migrants illegally while welcoming legal migrants. It can punish foreign criminals without treating every foreigner as a criminal. It can protect South African workers by punishing employers who exploit desperate migrants. It can strengthen hospitals without turning nurses or citizens into immigration officers. It can use technology and the border without encouraging people to hunt foreigners in communities. It can listen to the anger of its citizens without feeding hatred. And most importantly, it can attack the real cause of that anger: jobs, growth, education, housing, crime, corruption, infrastructure, inequality. That is where this story must eventually go, because no deportation bus can carry unemployment out of South Africa. No border drone can arrest corruption. No immigration court can repair a broken railway. No repatriation center can fix a falling school. And no foreigner leaving the country can replace the responsibility of leaders to build an economy that works for their own people. That is the truth. My people, South Africa is at a crossroad. It has shown that it can tighten immigration enforcement. It has shown that public pressure can force government action. It has shown that it can move tens of thousands of people through repatriation and deportation process in a short period. But the bigger test begins now, because the world will be watching what happens after the foreigners leave. If unemployment begins falling, if communities become safer, if services improve and opportunities grow, supporters of this crackdown will say they were right. But if unemployment remains above 30%, if young people still cannot find work, if crimes remain high, if corruption continues, if communities remain poor, then South Africa may discover something painful. The foreigner was never big enough to carry all of South Africa's problems on his back. Immigration can be a real problem without being the only problem. Illegal immigration can require serious action without becoming an excuse for hatred. And a country can protect its borders without losing its humanities. That is the balance South Africa has to find. Because history will not only remember how many people were deported, history will ask, what happened next? Did South Africa become safer? Did the country become more united? Did its relationship with Africa become stronger, or did it win a battle while the real world remained untouched? And perhaps the biggest question of it all is still the simplest one. If the pie is too small, should the country spend all its energy fighting over the slices, or it should finally ask why one of Africa's richest and most capable nations has not made the pie bigger? That is the conversation South Africa cannot afford to avoid. Because in the end, a great country is not measured by how many people it can remove. It is measured by how many opportunities it can create for the people who remain. Now, I want to hear from you. Do you believe South Africa's migration crackdown will improve life for ordinary South Africans? Or do you believe unemployment, crime and poverty will remain until the country tackles the deeper problems in its economy? And where should the line be drawn between strong border control and xenophobia? Let us know in the comments. Keep this conversation respectful because this issue is about real people on every side. If you enjoyed this breakdown, like the video, subscribe to Afri Arise, and share with someone who believes Africa needs deeper conversations, not just louder arguments. This is Afri Arise. My name is Blessing Chris. See you in the next one.